Hello, it's Transcendence Team again. Uh, so as you know, our Depainted project, uh, NES Godzilla Depainted, is canceled. It's over. Don't worry, there wasn't any kind of controversy or drama, and we don't hate each other. It's just like a case of we're all way too busy, and we probably should have started the story 2 years ago if we wanted to get it finished. But I didn't want to let it go out completely on like a whimper. So this video will be sort of an obituary for it. There's going to be this narration in a bit, which will have a sort of not necessarily what the actual narration would have been like, but like, it's serviceable enough. It shows you the screenshots, the story, all that jazz. And after that, we're just gonna generally show some plans and concept art and crap for if the story were to be continued. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's get into the video.
When I was a little kid, only two things mattered in my life: Godzilla and NES games. So naturally, when Skyrim came out for PlayStations, it meant less than nothing to me. I previously labored under the misapprehension that some other things were worth living for, but since that one day, well, let's just say I know better now. Back to the main subject though, Godzilla. Monster of Monsters for the NES was my lifeblood for the longest time. Whenever it was around me, I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I even got hospitalized on multiple occasions due to oxygen deprivation. The game itself was pretty mediocre, but I didn't care. The game's mere existence nearby was enough to placate me, for a time. Unfortunately, my juvenile self would make the second worst mistake of my life, and trade it for Amagon. Much to my regret when the game started sputtering, screeching, and secreting a viscous, tar-like fluid whenever I'd approach it. Recently, I bought a new NES system from DK Oldies for a bargain of $500,000 plus tax. Billy seemed weirdly remorseful for me upon telling him about this, so he gave me some of his games for free. He gave me the typical NES stuff, like Legend of Zelda, Q-Boy, Action 52, and even 630 in one classic collection. NES Mini and Famicom minigames plus 600 classic NES multi-cart game cartridge for 8-bit 72-pin. However, out of all these games, one stood out from the rest, and I assume you already know where this is going. It was my beloved Godzilla, Monster of Monsters. I was ecstatic to be reunited with the game, only comparable to unearthing a treasure thought to be lost for decades. I rushed home, running past multiple crimes happening in broad daylight. I was fully accepting of the idea that this would be my last time alive as long as I had this bauble clutched within my arms. After all, it was all I had left in life. Eventually, I made it home and slid the cartridge into its slot. As the music flooded through the speakers, I felt a sense of relief wash through my body. After these slow, agonizing, utterly despair-inducing years, Nirvana rested within my fingertips. The gameplay wasn't any better than how it was since I last played it, though. It was still the same old loop of walking forward and killing everything. For the record, I'm not opposed to killing everything, but I'd be lying if I said that Streets of Rage hasn't done this exact thing better, like 3 times over, bordering on 4. It wasn't long until I had no escape from crossing fate with the first boss of the world, Godzilla. From what I heard, they only threw him into the game for the 2 people who actually watched and enjoyed Space Amoeba. Normally, Godzilla's strategy would include backing you into a corner and stun-locking you for a bit. It doesn't even do damage to you, probably because the queue testing for this game was short enough to set a world record, so it's really just an annoying time waster, more than anything. And like clockwork, he did it in the fight after getting down to half health, pinning me to the corner. But strangely, he just kept going. And going, and going. Even after I should have been timed out of the fight, Godzilla continued his assault, and the screen was slowly becoming more and more corrupted. Here's an approximation of what it looked like. I know, it looks very shitty, but I want you to understand that not everyone casually has an NES capture card at the ready. I made sure to get one later, but that isn't until after I had beaten Mars, so you're gonna have to suck it up and enjoy my chicken scratch. I needed to find a use for these kids' menus from my former job at rallies anyway. Ah crap, the symbolism on the top right doesn't happen later, let me just fix that. Anyway, I cleaned out the cartridge with a Q-tip and did not blow into it, thus preventing damage to the cartridge. After putting the game back in and playing through Earth again, everything went normal. Moving on to Mars. Crap, I'm gonna need to make another recreation. On the right side of the board, I saw Titanosaurus. I know this monster wasn't in the original game due to my infatuation with everything involving it, so this game is quite a shock to me. Admittedly though, that's kind of distracting from the fact that I kind of feel apathetic towards Titanosaurus as well. There's a lot of monsters I don't care about, and Titanosaurus is certainly one of them. It would have been nice to see the visitor, but for the time being I just had to settle for this. I walked through Mars and fought Godzilla again, this time killing him before he could do his tentacle smack attack. Instead of dying, however, Godzilla didn't sink to the bottom. Instead, his sprite began bugging out with his eyes appearing all over the screen. I was honestly foolish for not taking this as a warning. I simply wrote it off as a particularly nasty glitch, but looking back on it, this glitch was too coordinated and too specific to simply be that. In retrospect it's a bit frustrating to look back on, but I continued onward anyway, and fought Mogera next. Mogera was almost twice the size he usually was. Unfortunately for him, this seemed to be more of a disadvantage, as his rickety robot body doesn't really allow for that much mobility. Honestly, I think this fight might have been easier than Mogera's actual boss fight. The weirdest thing, though, was at the end. When Mogera died, he proceeded to shatter into a million pieces at once. Shame I couldn't get a screen cap of it, though. It happened for such a short period of time, and there's no way I could have seen something like it coming. Just trust me on this here, it was definitely very shocking. I braced myself for any kind of glitches that'd occur in Titanosaurus' fight, but when I entered the match, he was completely normal. He was a bit taller than Godzilla, and that was probably due to how he was probably standing on an invisible milk crate. The fight itself was as button-mashy as most of the game's boss fights normally are, and by the end I quickly found myself getting bored. At that point, I jokingly asked the game to give me something actually worth a damn to talk about. Little did I know how far the finger on that monkey's paw would curl, and that curling would begin. In Pathos. Pathos was the first wholly new world I had seen in my playthrough. Unlike the other boards which were bright and vibrant, Pathos was nearly the exact opposite. This shift in mood was even reflected in the music. I'm not really someone who knows music that well, but I'll try to describe each new song to the best of my ability. Pathos' board theme was rather melancholy, but also had a tinge of uneasiness to it. Almost like the feeling of being paranoid, like it doesn't want me to find out about something. Another thing that caught my eye was that Titanosaurus was back again. I understand that bosses would return in later worlds, but it was here my apathy really started to set in. I understood why some people would be excited for him to be a recurring boss, but I honestly would have preferred it if I was allowed to beat the tar out of Roland Emmerich. Other than that, there wasn't much else remarkable about the board. Before I moved Godzilla to one of the Blue Mountains, however, I stopped myself. Upon thinking about it, I realized how much I didn't feel like playing through all the levels twice with Godzilla and Mothra. I didn't know what Pathos was gonna be like, but I knew that doing what I described could potentially cause the novelty to wear off really quickly. So, I furnished a solution. I used my reliable fiberglass tape, made of real fiber and 100% glass, and as you can see in the screen cap, it worked like a charm. Moving on to the stage's description, the Blue Mountains as mentioned in the name were there, and featured a scratched-up look to them. In the sky, there was also a bright red version of the planet from Earth's stages. It seemed to have a part of it smeared, and while I didn't completely notice that detail when I originally played through Pathos, it still filled me with an odd sense of discomfort, definitely not helped by the lack of any stars in the sky, only the red planet to decorate it at all. There weren't even any enemies to do battle with, adding to this feeling of general disquiet. Well, except, I did eventually run into this guy. They didn't seem aggressive, so I just decided to approach them to see what had happened.
You there. I need you to dispose of something for me.
This moment caught me off guard because of the mere existence of dialogue. At no point in the original game did anything ever talk, let alone ask you for a favor. While I was still processing this whole situation, this mysterious creature was completely gone. Ultimately, I decided to go along with his favor since it's just trying to get rid of a box, and I even found myself becoming excited of what else this game could pull off, seeing as it was adding completely new gameplay mechanics like this. So, I moved to one of the orange circle level pieces with a feeling of optimism. Honestly, I think this must have been the game's sick way of responding to my excitement. I appeared to be in a cave of some kind, with Matango hives littered all throughout the level. Much to my dismay, I couldn't destroy a single one of them. Then, there was the Matango spawn, all throughout the level and annoying as ever. A gross detail in the stage is that each new one spawned by stretching out from the ground or the ceiling, and breaking off of a string that kept them attached to either of those sides. Even the music wasn't particularly pleasing, featuring a discordant piano and infrequent groaning noises. I tried to get through the level as quickly as I could, as I found myself getting sick of it, and moved on to the blue jungle stage. I was back to the dark blue atmosphere of the outside, and while it wasn't completely comforting, I was at least glad to be out of the cave. To my surprise, there were actually enemies from the original game in this level, but most of them had already been killed, and even the ones that could attack didn't directly aim for me, acting almost zombie-like. The only enemy that seemed to not have either of those two features was that jet with talons in the sky, circling a lot of the remains of the enemies like a vulture. I tried attacking it, but it immediately flew out of my attacking range, and generally tried to avoid me rather than fight back. It was strange, but at least the jet knew what was good for it. I had come across a cliff at the point of the stage where the screen stopped scrolling. I wondered to myself how bad this'd be if I just went with normal Godzilla, only to be interrupted by a prompt that came on screen. Apparently, this was the spot where I was expected to toss away the box. That second option really piqued my curiosity though. Maybe it was because of my bad habit of reading other people's mail for myself, but I was really curious to see what that thing from earlier wanted to be rid of. So, I decided to take a look inside, as I wanted to know what exactly was going on.
I always had a bad feeling about you, but what you've done has introduced me to a new level of disgust. You knew you couldn't hide from this atrocity forever, so you sought to erase everyone who could know. I hope your death is slow and agonizing.
Needless to say, I was confused. I don't know what this could have meant, or what that guy's involvement in this was, but the third thing at the end is what gets to me especially. I can't say why right now, but that horrified face on that stone tablet has been echoing through my mind a lot, and I found myself flinching when finding it in my screenshots for this planet. After reading through all of this, I was sent back to the prompt screen, and chose the option to dispose of it almost immediately. I didn't know what was going on, but a part of me didn't want to know, so I left the blue jungle stage and went on to fight the bosses. This time, however, each of the bosses were vastly different experiences than what I was expecting. The first boss I chose to fight was Godzilla, but instead, he was replaced by this tall, lanky aberration. It fought completely differently than Godzilla, too, as it mostly preferred to keep Godzilla and Mothra away from it, instead of how the original Godzilla was more aggressive and tried to get as close to you as possible by running and jumping rather quickly. That didn't stop it from coming up with its own brand of stun locking, as in one particular instance where I tried approaching it, it started smacking me furiously, keeping me in place for a bit. Despite that annoyance, I still defeated him and moved on to Mogware's fight. Next on the chopping block was Mogare, who had a replacement of his own. His fight was considerably easier, as he would hop around constantly and occasionally shoot a few projectiles at you. It didn't seem to have a good amount of control on its body though, kinda making their modifications seem more harmful than helpful. Then, I took on Titanosaurus. He wasn't anywhere to be seen at first, but then this message appeared below my HUD. I was disappointed by this, for obvious reasons, and silently wished any other monster could have been added to my inventory, but I was at low health anyway, so I decided to cut my losses and move on to Biollante's fight. But surprisingly, although in retrospect ultimately unsurprising, Even she had a gimmick of her own. I was put in what seemed to be a how-to-play screen for a minigame. I had seen this game pull off some interesting new content up to this point, but this definitely took the cake for the most radical departure from Monster of Monsters. Honestly though, I think I was just relieved that this wasn't going to be a typical boss fight, and that I wouldn't have to risk losing both of my monsters at the same time. Nevertheless, I readied myself, and held my NES controller very delicately, making sure it was in a comfortable position within my palm, and got ready to give the minigame a try. As for the minigame itself, well, I tried to tell myself that it was at least neat, but looking back on it, it was a very clunky experience. While I made absolute sure that my NES controller wasn't feeling even the slightest sense of discomfort, I still didn't understand how any of the controls in this minigame worked. I understood the concept of it, it was just that actually doing it was confusing, and I was very much not willing to twist my wrist as demonstrated in the minigame. Somehow, I ended up winning, with Biollante in last place. I was happy that I at least won, but that joy quickly waned upon what happened next.
Biollante lost, and you know what that means.
I was sent back to the board. There wasn't any music to speak of, and all pieces were completely absent. All that was there was a box in the bottom right that was asking me to play the last stage. I took a deep breath, and tried to not let this foreboding aura get to me, and that's when I heard from it.
Hi there, fella. I'm the law around these parts. And this planet ain't big enough for the two of us. It ain't lawful for you to be roaming around like this. So, why don't we have a gentleman's duel? Take 10 paces.
Once I was put on this stage, I felt a flaring pain across my body. It felt like I suddenly had a rash, but upon looking at myself, there weren't any visible wounds. No scratches, bruises, anything. I thought it was just a knee-jerk reaction to seeing Godzilla like this, so I took another deep breath and did as the top of the screen asked. I carefully pressed the D-pad and counted each time I did, expecting something to jump out. The only thing that could have been remotely described as music was a slow drum resembling a heartbeat that got louder and louder with each step I took. At 5 steps, a fire began to rise in the background, creating a hellish atmosphere that made my skin run cold. Not helped by how the drum beat was getting louder and louder until...
Now, on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Once this thing appeared on screen, the music broke out into a more frantic theme, and you can absolutely believe me when I say that I ran like hell. While this game's new world was mildly unnerving, nothing could have prepared me for what this wretched creation would look like. It didn't resemble any of the kaiju I'd seen in any Godzilla movie, and I frequently found myself repeating the question, what the fuck is this thing? Throughout the chase, I had seen multiple corpses littered throughout. As if I wasn't panicked enough, they certainly conveyed to me well enough what would have likely happened if I got caught by this thing.
I tell you, partner, I've been having a real hog-killing time with you so far, but I think we could be kicking up more dust. This calls for my beauty, though I call her Lissa. Now skin that smoke wagon hoss.
It felt like a nightmare. No matter how much I tried to get away from this thing, it would only continue to give chase, even going as far as adding new attacks and laughing at me like this was all a form of amusement for the Hellbeast. Just as soon as I thought it wouldn't end though, the screen slowly faded to black, and I saw Godzilla run off screen. I had thought I finally won, but the Hellbeast had some parting words for me.
Well, shoot. Looks like y'all's legs were made for running. Well, I'm beat for now. I need a moment to wet the old whistle, so run as far as you'd like. Happy trails, and don't let no one knock you off your saddle.
How How I felt at this moment was indescribable. I was relieved, but I found my whole body shaking, like the realization that it was over hadn't completely set in yet. While that was happening though, my fears slowly turned into burning curiosity. If this was what the first new world the game had to offer was like, what would the rest of it be like? What purpose was this game even made for? Suddenly, a bright flash of light came from the TV for a split second, before fading into the name of what would be the next world, Trans.
And then Zax was shot 57 times and died. The ends.